Miami's Rueben Hurricane Bain is the top graded freshman defensive lineman in the country right now. If that surprises you, it shouldn't. But there is a certain Reuben Bain stat that surprises the heck out of me.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I am Alex Donno, your host, University of Miami alumnus, longtime South Florida sports radio vet, and contributor to allhurricanes.com. Thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts and available free on YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So Reuben Bain, with his 84.1 Pro Football Focus grade through these first four games, as mentioned, literally, he is the highest graded freshman defensive lineman in the country. Really not too surprising if you followed Reuben's high school career. It's still a mystery to me why he wasn't a five-star coming out of high school, why he was a four-star. I think if he was a couple of inches taller, would have been a consensus five-star. He's got that five-star productivity. He's got that five-star work ethic. So it really shouldn't surprise anyone. And Bain has seen his role increased over the past few weeks with so many injuries on the defensive line. We haven't seen Branson Dean or Akeem Mesidor or Nigel Lee Kelly over the last couple of weeks. So Bain has stepped in, next man up, and he's been fantastic. I mean, most teams in the country would be, very thrilled to have a depth option like Reuben Bain as a true freshman coming off your bench. He has made the most of it. And as we've talked about on the show over these last couple of days, not only has Bain been productive statistically, but he gets held a lot, and it doesn't get called because he's a true freshman. He's not going to get that kind of respect yet from the officials. So again, I'm not surprised that Bain has been the most productive freshman defensive lineman so far this year. You watch the games, that's an easy thing to spot. Here's what does surprise me. Huge shout out and props to Jason, Canes Chief on X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it for this crazy stat comparison so far. Believe it or not, so far, 4 games in, I know 4 games don't tell the entire story, Reuben Bain, according to Pro Football Focus's metrics, has been better so far this season than Florida State's Jared Verse. I don't mean that to tear down Verse in any way. That's an awesome player. I mean this to show you how productive Reuben Bain has been so far with the snaps he's gotten, because Jared Verse, consensus first-round draft pick in this coming NFL draft, an experienced guy, has been in college since 2019. And so far this season, Reuben Bain, 119 snaps. Verse has played 204 snaps, so he has been on the field more, to be fair. Bain has an 84.1 Pro Football Focus score. Verse has a 76.0 PFF score. Bain has 10 pressures. Verse has 13. Bain has 1 sack. Verse has 0 so far. Bain has 4 total tackles. Verse has 9. So how crazy is that to think that Reuben Bain has been so efficient and so productive with the amount of snaps he's gotten so far? And 119 is a lot of snaps. It's not the 200 that Verse has played. That Reuben Bain is grading out higher than a guy who's part of one of the better defenses in the country and is expected to be a first-round pick in this coming NFL draft. That's crazy. Now, as far as how Bain is doing compared to his Miami teammates, he grades out higher on defense than anyone else on the football team right now who's played at least 100 snaps, okay, with his 84.1 defensive grade. He's actually, surprisingly enough, at 119 snaps on the year, Bain has played more snaps than Leonard Taylor, who's played about 100. For Reuben Bain, most of his snaps have come on the edge, but 22 of his defensive snaps, and by the way, kudos to David Lake of Inside the U for compiling these stats, 22 of Bain's snaps have been played on the interior in passing downs. So Reuben Bain, and again, I love how he represents this city, standout at Miami Central, set sack records left and right, He won that Nat Moore Trophy during his senior year, which is always a great thing for any South Florida high school player to have on the trophy case. He kept his talents in the 305, and now he's out there doing really, really big things out there. I love to see this from Rueben Bain. We get a question from our guy, Q Irvin. And by the way, we are opening to more questions today, courtesy of our subtext listeners. If you subscribe to our subtext chat, I include the link in the show description below. You can ask me questions anytime. I answer them on the subtext or I answer them on the show. I give you guys breaking news, scoops, recruiting updates, all sorts of good nuggets on there. Try it free for 14 days by clicking the link in the show description below. And then if you like it, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. We give you a lot of added value on there. So our guy Q asks us, hey, barring injury, do you think Rueben Bain has a chance to go down as one of our best defensive ends in school history? Boy, Q, you want me to put a lot of pressure on this guy. He's off to a fantastic start. He's outplaying Jared Verse so far. He's got the best defensive rating on his entire team at Miami. So I chuckle a little bit because, he's 4 games into his 3 or 4 year-long college career. But you know what? It's not that crazy because you see just how difficult he already is to block as a true freshman. Him weighing around 265, 270 already, chiseled already as a true freshman. Bain's only going to keep getting better, not worse. So, yeah, with all due respect to some of the greats that have come before him, like Calais Campbell, who I covered, Jerome McDougal, who I went to school with, Ted Hendricks, guys like that, Rueben Bain, I think, has the opportunity, especially if you consider his connection to this city and one of the most prominent local high schools, which kind of just adds to his whole South Florida mystique. But even on the field, Rueben Bain has the opportunity to be as great as any of those names that I mentioned. And who knows, maybe even better by the time it's all said and done. We're going to open to more questions on the other side. But here's something that I'm going to answer. Even if you guys weren't asking me this, I've got to answer this on the other side. What's the biggest area of Miami's defense that needs to be fixed heading into conference play? Georgia Tech, North Carolina, Clemson coming up in consecutive weeks. What does Miami need to tweak? What does Miami need to fix on that side of the football before you get into, and you got Florida State coming up in November on the road. That's going to be a tough one. What do you have to tweak and fix before you get into the meat and potatoes of your ACC schedule? We've got so much coming up, my friends. As we like to say here, we're only getting started on Locked On Canes. Oh, I'm only getting started this weekend with FanDuel. Football weekends with FanDuel are the absolute best, and you can snap into NFL action this week with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action than right now. The app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen today. And guys, it's almost Friday. College football season is back. And this season, Locked On has kicked up our coverage with Locked On College Football Kickoff Live. Each Friday, Locked On goes live from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. I'm part of that show, and it's an honor. 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern, every Locked On College YouTube channel, including this one. College Football Kickoff Live covers playoff implications, the conference rivalry games, and we go in-depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable of Locked On College hosts covering their team every day. Find Locked On College Football Kickoff Live every Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., so tune in tomorrow on any Locked On College YouTube channel, and you will not want to miss it. So, what does Miami's defense need to improve upon and tweak for this next 8-game run coming up? Like if we actually want to believe that, Miami can contend for an ACC championship this year, here's a couple of notes. Thanks to my colleague Brian Smith at All Hurricanes for finding this stat. Miami Hurricanes are 39th in the country in red zone defense. So that means they're above average, but they can definitely be better there in the red zone. Now, This one is not specifically a defensive category, but the defense has been guilty of some of this throughout the season so far. I didn't think Miami was this low in penalties, but so far in penalties, the Hurricanes are 114th in the country. So honestly, I think that's the one stat team-wise you look at and say that's brutal, okay? Now, we had a lot of those last year. If you were looking for brutal stats in 2022, rushing offense, passing offense, scoring offense, red zone offense, third down offense, penalties, like everything was in the hundreds or the 80s or 90s, hundreds last year. It was brutal across the board. Like this year, I think the only team stat you look at and say, that should be a lot better, that can be a lot better, is the penalties. Like being 114th in the country in penalties, it's inexcusable. Okay. I mean, thank goodness you're 4-0 in spite of that, but you need to, turn that no longer into a weakness, maybe a strength. Try to get into like the 40s or 50s in penalties. All right. Now, Matt Shodell at Kane Sport crunched some other numbers on Miami's defense that I think could be better. Some of these are very good, though. Miami is the nation's 30th best graded defense overall. That's pretty good. I mean, obviously, you'd like to be higher, but being number 30 is not bad. They're 86.2% total. Broken down, Miami is the number 6 run defense. That is elite, with an elite 91.5 grade. I remember Miami only gave up 11 rushing yards last week. I think they're only giving up like 44, 48 per game, something like that, which is awesome. The Hurricanes are number 9 in tackling. That's very good at 80.9%. The Hurricanes only miss 5 tackles per game. That has dramatically improved. Tackling for the last several years has been a big problem. So far this year, especially when you consider some of the great tacklers that you added. Jaden Davis, keeps leading the team in tackles from cornerback. He's awesome at that. Kiko Malinois is a great tackler. Rueben Bain hasn't missed a single tackle all year. Just throwing that out there, if we continue the Rueben Bain love fest. So the tackling has been great. So then you get into the stuff that is not quite as good. Well, the pass rush is still very good. So number 14 in pass rush at 79.6%. But then you drop to number 74 in coverage at 76.7%. So it's nitpicky on what's been a really good defense so far. You've obviously played, some teams that are not on your talent level so far to start the year. But if you want to be nitpicky, the pass coverage has been the big area that needs to improve. Now, here's a reason why I'm not as worried about that as some of you are. Some of you just think what they have been is what they always will be. I will remind you that for the past 2 games, something you haven't had in your defensive secondary is Kam Kinchens. I would argue Kam Kinchens is the second most irreplaceable person on this football team behind only Tyler Van Dyke, right? And, thankfully, Miami has gone up with that. When they've been without Kam Kinchens for these last 2 games, it's been against Bethune-Cookman and Temple and not North Carolina and Clemson, right? Because I believe in certain games, not having Kinchens out there could potentially cost you a win, okay? And I think Kam is going to be back for the ACC schedule. The bye week comes at a perfect time for him. But I definitely think that passing defense grade can get better and will get better when you've got the quarterback of your defense and the general of your defensive secondary back out there. But at the same time, all right, I know that, at certain times, opposing teams have tried to pick on Corey Couch. Corey responded very well last week with those 2 interceptions. Could have nearly had a third in that game. But, Miami's passing defense so far has been the more vulnerable part of that D. But I think that's going to get better in terms of the communication and what you're going to add back with Kam Kinchens when he's ready to return. But that's definitely an area that Miami can stand to improve. Okay. Oh, we got a recruiting related question here because Miami fans, we keep talking about Jeremiah Smith, Ohio State commit, top player in the entire country, 5-star wide receiver out of Chaminade, Madonna. Is he going to flip to Miami? Is he seeing what Miami's doing on offense compared to what Ohio State is doing on offense right now? We get this question from Bam80, who says, hey, Brandon Ennis on Ohio State, he's a freshman for OSU, hasn't caught 1 pass at OSU so far. What kind of impact is that having on Jeremiah Smith? And on the flip side, Ray Joseph is getting receptions and rushing attempts and return attempts. Even Robbie Washington has 2 catches so far. Um, I think that's a good point, Bam. I think that's a great point. At least, like, you know, I don't these days, I don't know what Jeremiah is thinking about Ohio State, but I know Jeremiah is watching Miami, and he's going to be at the Georgia Tech game on October 7th after the bye week. He can look at Miami and say, not only is their passing game turned way up right now, but you do have some true freshman players getting burned on that offense. So he can look at that and say, you know what, when I get to Miami next year, I'm definitely going to get utilized there. And less of that is happening so far at Ohio State. So I think that's a major factor because players want to be able to get on the field and play. Now, I think the way you phrased that question was great because the question I've been getting a lot of is kind of, hey, what Ohio State's offense looks like right now compared to what Miami's offense looks like right now. Whereas I think the bigger factor for Jeremiah, because to be fair to Ohio State, if he sticks in their recruiting class, he's going to be coming in the same recruiting class as Aaron Noland, who's a really exciting quarterback. So if he may not be so worried about what Kyle McCord is doing right now because Jeremiah Smith is probably thinking, well, that's not really my quarterback. Aaron Noland is my quarterback. And, he's been, I assume he's been lighting it up at high school. I haven't really followed him that much so far this year, but I assume Noland has been lighting it up. You guys can tell me if he's not, but I figure he's having a good senior season so far in high school. But I think the point you make about freshmen getting utilized in Miami's offense, I think that's a great point. And I think any recruit has to feel pretty good about Miami. The Miami Hurricanes right now, not only do they lead the ACC in true freshman snaps, I came to find out they lead all FBS apparently, or at least Power 5 in true freshman snaps so far this year. So the Hurricanes, despite a 4-0 start, are getting a lot of young guys into games, which is always a nice thing to see. We get a good question here from Paul, who says, hey, we've done stock up and stock down on players, but whose stock is up among the coaches? He says, I'm personally not stock down on any coach right now, but I'm curious who your stock up coaches are. And Paul, I agree with that. Like, how can I look to any coach right now on this 4-0 Miami team that's played really well and say his stock is down? I think everybody's stock, as far as whose stock is rising highest, here's somebody we don't talk enough about on this show, the linebackers coach Derek Nicholson. His stock is way up. That unit has been crushing it so far. And it's not just Kiko and Wes Basaint. KJ Cloyd has been a revelation so far. And Corey Flagg has been awesome. Corey Flagg has looked like this is the best version of him we've seen in a Miami uniform. And Derek Nicholson, he's one of these guys who's really fun to watch and listen to coach, right? And I think it was Mario Cristobal who talked about it a week or two ago. Like nobody is louder than D Nick. And I'm a big fan of the coaches who really like hype you up, right? And it's all positive, uplifting stuff. But D Nick is like super loud, super energized. He's bringing out the best of these linebackers. I think D Nick has done a really good job. So his stock is definitely up. And a more obvious choice, the stock is way up for Kevin Beard. I mean, he's getting so much more out of all these receivers were here last year, right? Restrepo was here. He missed a lot of time last year, but Restrepo was here last year. Jacoby George was here. Colby Young was here. He's already getting so much more out of these guys than Josh Gaddis did. It's a silly to even compare the two. Kevin Beard is crushing it. And I also think Tim Harris Jr., I mean, because we talk so much about the running game and the running backs. Tim Harris Jr. deserves credit. Alex Mirabal, he gets his limbs back with that offensive line has been the strength of the team so far. And, I feel like we've given enough flowers to the coordinators, right? I mean, there's nothing to, if you watch the show every day, you know how much praise we give to Lance Guidry and Shannon Dawson. So I don't have to go through that point too much. And, I want to give some credit to the tight ends coach, Cody Woodall, because he's had to deal with a really injury-riddled room so far. I mean, the best guy in his room, I would argue is Elijah Arroyo, who hasn't suited up yet. They've had a weird situation to deal with for whatever reason. Jaleel Skinner, if he's just not heavy enough and not enough of a blocker yet to put on the field, they haven't really had him at their disposal so much. He's played just a little bit. He's doing really good stuff with a true freshman. Riley Williams has been one of the freshman standouts. I've got to give Coach Woodle some credit for coaching him up. And Cam McCormick, who might be older than Coach Woodle. I'm not sure about that because I've met Coach Woodle before. He's a pretty young up and coming. He might be younger than Cam McCormick, so maybe Cam is teaching Woodle some things. But McCormick he's been A+ as a blocking tight end. He's had a couple of big catches this year, so that's who I would say is stock up on the coaching staff so far. We get a question that we're going to answer on the other side about Miami's depth. We get a question about the remaining schedule and how our expectations are going to change. And, do we root for Notre Dame this weekend or not? I think you guys already know my answer on that. Keep it locked right here. We got more to come on this episode of Locked On Canes. Thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts and available free on YouTube. And if you're an everydayer, take that everydayer experience to the next level by signing up for our exclusive SMS texting community through Subtext. I include the link in the show description below. You get text messages directly from my phone to your phone with one-on-ones. You can ask me questions, breaking news, recruiting scoops. Try it free for 14 days by clicking the link in the show description below. Then if you like it, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. We give you a lot of added value on there on our Subtext platform. We get this from Storm Life, who says, I'm cheering for Duke to beat Notre Dame this weekend, he says. How do you feel about it? Storm Life, listen, man, I hate Notre Dame. I'm with you. I'm with you on it. And there are probably reasons why I shouldn't be, because remember, Notre Dame is not in football an actual member of the ACC where Duke is. Well, actually, you know what? So then it doesn't matter. I was going to say, because then it's a conference loss for Duke, but it's not. So there's no reason not to root for Duke, because that doesn't help their ACC record at all. Notre Dame is the scum of the earth, as we know. And honestly, I learned a hard lesson last week, okay? Never again. I rooted for Notre Dame last week to beat Ohio State. My reasons were simple but selfish. I wanted Notre Dame to beat Ohio State last week because I thought if the Irish can beat that team, it's going to help Miami potentially flip Jeremiah Smith, right? If the Irish can get it done. But I didn't take into account the loser DNA that Notre Dame have. Big games, they choke. 10 guys on the field. Al Golden coaching up their defense. He's got 10 men on the field in the most important downs at the end of that game. So I learned my lesson. The one time I actually rooted for Notre Dame to win a game, they let me down. Never again. Okay. So let's all be Duke Blue Devil fans this weekend. Okay. Get a question from Jordan, who says, if you could add a Cane legend to this team, one on offense and one on defense, who would you choose? I didn't have to think about that a whole lot, because some of you may think about that as adding guys to positions of need, like Cane's legend. I'm thinking about it. Who were like the best leaders and the guys with the Miami DNA that would, really get this team charged up and help their attitude? Not to say the attitude is fine, but if I'm talking about bringing like the old school Canes mentality, I would go with Michael Irvin on offense, because, that guy, despite the fact that we've seen him wearing Colorado colors a few times, Irvin is still one of the all-time great Canes, tremendous attitude, Miami DNA. And wouldn't it be fun to watch Irv catch passes from Tyler Van Dyke? How crazy would that be? So I'd go Michael Irvin on offense. And on defense, I definitely debated either Ed Reed or Ray Lewis. I'm just going to give the slight edge to, I don't know, man. It's tough. I give the slight edge to Ray, because I feel like Ray, they both are great speech givers, but a Ray Lewis motivational speech makes me feel like I could put on pads and play in the NFL. That's how good Ray Lewis is with like the motivation, and one of the all-time great linebackers in NFL history and college history. So that was a tough call for me. I was between Ed Reed, Ray Lewis. I'm just going to give the slight edge to Ray Lewis would be the guy. Those are the Canes legends. Michael Irvin on offense, Ray Lewis on defense were the guys that I would have suit up if I could. We get a question from Quan the Cane, who says, hey, as we enter 8 straight games of conference play, I believe our starting 22 can play with anybody. However, What are your top 2 position groups of concern when it comes to Miami's depth? I tipped my hand to this already with some of the comments I made earlier, but to me, I'd go quarterback and safety. As much as I really like Jakari Brown, who we don't talk about enough, and Emory Williams, who's looked really good, I've got to believe there's a big drop off after Tyler Van Dyke. So if God forbid, if anything were to happen to Tyler Van Dyke, that's going to cost this team wins. Okay. So quarterback. On defense, safety. And it's not just Cam, James as well. And James Williams is having an awesome season so far. So, like, if you were to lose your starting 2 safeties, there's a big drop off that's costing you wins, right? We've already seen so far this year that Miami has more defensive line depth, especially at the interior, than we thought, right? Their tight end depth has been tested. That unit has been okay so far. Running back, they've got depth through the floor or through the ceiling or through the, I guess, depth. It would be under the floor. They have depth into the basement at running back and a lot of other positions. So I'd go quarterback and safety would be those 2 spots for me. We get a question from Americane who says, I feel that with the games we played and with the remaining schedule, I'd think that recalibration of expectations are in order, but to what extent? has played very well to this point, but to be honest, not against the toughest competition. I'm still in the 9-3 mindset, but how reasonable is it to suggest 10-2? Sorry for the long one here. He says, you never apologize for an awesome question, Americane. Okay, well, it sounds like your calibration was already a little bit higher than mine because my preseason prediction was 8-4. Yours was 9-3. I've now probably ramped mine up to thinking this team can win 9 games. I don't think 10 is out of the realm of possibility, but to think about it, if you're going to win 10 games, you've got to win the majority of your games against Clemson, North Carolina on the road, Florida State on the road. Louisville's a pretty good team. NC State is not a bad team by any stretch. And, you got to make sure you don't fall into a lobster trap against Boston College on the road, which is always a tough place to play, especially late in the year. So it's still this team keeps playing the way that they're playing. And if they stay relatively healthy, based on what I've seen on the field so far, they resemble a 10-2 team, right? Schedule's not easy. So I have already recalibrated from 8-4 to 9-3. If you want to recalibrate from 9-3 to 10-2, that's on you. I'm just not quite there yet because, you're entering the tougher part of your schedule. So maybe we'll talk again in 3 weeks about this and maybe I'll feel differently, but I'm in the, I've upped my prediction from 8-4 to 9-3 at this point. We get this from Caesar, who says, hey, this is not a question, but a statement. I just love how under the radar Miami is, and we're playing hard and having fun while doing it. I haven't seen that in a long time. I just hope and pray we stay healthy, and all players that are injured, may they heal quickly. We need all hands on deck for ACC play. Take no team lightly and keep the foot on the gas pedal because, like Shannon Dawson said, you get conservative, you get beat. Go Canes, he says. I mean, listen, I think the bye week, just based on how, banged up with a lot of minor stuff Miami is after the Temple game, I think the bye week came at the perfect time. As far as flying under the radar, I think the players and coaches love it. They like flying under the radar. I'm just going to say this, man. If you start flying a little above that radar, it could help us even more in recruiting. And selfishly, it could also help my numbers at Locked On Canes because, the more people that Google search Miami Hurricanes, the more people stumble across my content. So flying under the radar is fun, but I'm looking for that SEO traffic, my friends. All right, guys, we're going to be back tomorrow, or, if any news breaks, recruiting or otherwise, we'll be back accordingly. Emergency episodes if needed. Otherwise, we will talk to you tomorrow, and it's going to be a double day tomorrow. Locked On Canes and Locked On College Football Kickoff Live. I co-host that from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. every single Friday. So we will talk to you later on another episode of Locked On Canes, part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.